Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Ullas Karanth. I'd like to ask you if you could tell us a bit about your life and how you got involved with conservation and with tigers.
I was born in a small town in southwestern India in the state of Karnataka. It was a rich landscape with a lot of forests, a lot of wildlife which was being hunted down very badly. This was in the early 50s when I was growing up. But I always had a fascination for tigers because the local culture had tiger in many forms in it, and my father had some interest in nature, so he read me Jim Corbett's hunting books. He was a famous British hunter of man-eating tigers, and I got very interested in tigers because of that reason. Then later on, when I was an engineering student at the age of 17, I read an article by the great biologist Dr. George Scheller, who had done the first scientific study of tigers, and at that time I made up my mind that I will at some point give up engineering, move away and become a tiger biologist. That became my dream. It took me 20 more years to realize it, but it happened.
Yes. And then you got involved with that, you did research, you have been doing research for decades on tigers. Could you tell us a bit about the status of the tiger now in India? How is the situation in the part of India that you work and in other parts of India as well, in the center, in the northeast?
Looking back in the 1960s, 1964, 65, it looked like the tiger will go extinct. They were being hunted, their prey were being killed, the habitat was being cleared for farming and for logging, so tigers were really on their way out. Then in 1974, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, she started listening to conservationists, she brought very strong laws, and the Indian Forestry Department did a very good job of implementing the laws. So from 1974, the tiger population started coming back, and over time it has gradually recovered with some setbacks and some recovery. And if you look at the present day situation, the largest tiger populations are in southwest India, in the Western Ghat mountains, which is part of my study area, is in that region. Then in central India, in the state of Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, there are substantial tiger populations in a few reserves. Then there are isolated but good populations in parks in western India like Ranthambore, Kaziranga in northeast. But over vast parts of India where you see green on the map everywhere, extensive forest in northeast India, for example, the hunting is very bad, the hunting of prey is very bad, so the tigers are not doing well there. So it varies and depends on where you look how the tiger is doing.
Okay, but in general you would say that the trend for the whole population now is to increase a bit, because the increases in the south more than compensate the losses in the northeast. Could you say that?
Yeah, the losses in the northeast happened at the same time as the losses elsewhere. But in southwest, parts of central India and parts of northern India, like what they call the Terai and Kaziranga, the tigers started coming back after the 70s and 80s and 90s, but in the big other areas they didn't come back. So the concentration is very lopsided. 90% of Indian tigers are in reserves. They are not in the general multi-use forests.
And well, in the beginning when we started to work with tiger, the estimates of abundance of tiger were very crude, weren't they? And now you were one of the pioneers in using camera trapping together with capture-recapture methods to estimate population sizes of tiger. Could you please tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, in 1974 when the tiger recovery started with strong enforcement, the government officials were also asked to count tigers and report on numbers, but they were not scientists, they were not trained to do it scientifically. So they used tracks, censusing tracks and claiming to identify individual tigers using a method called pugmark census. The method did not work at all, and using this method their numbers started going up. And at some point in 2004 it reached nearly 4,500 tigers in India. And right from 1984, when I got trained as a biologist, I started saying this method does not work. It's very faulty, but it took them 20 years and the loss of some major populations before they recognized that it was a bad method. But parallelly, I was very keen to develop from 1990, when the cheap camera traps came along, the first camera traps came, I knew that this was where the future was, so I started deploying them to count tigers in India in 93, 94, and started getting pictures, started being able to identify them. And because of my engineering interest, I also was not afraid of numbers and equations. So I knew this, although I got some pictures, I did not know how many of the tigers I was catching. So the second question had to be, okay, I got 10 tigers, but how many more have I missed? So that is where capture-recapture comes in, and I sought out a collaboration with Jim Nichols, who is one of the really pioneers in capture-recapture analysis and methods. So we started working together right from 1990s and developed a joint way of working with camera trap data and capture-recapture. And since then, for last 30 years, I have studied a very large tiger population continuously using this method till the end of last year.
And you use the different patterns of markings of each tiger individual as a kind of a natural mark, let's say.
Yeah, instead of catching a tiger and putting numbers written on it, we use the natural stripes to recognize individuals. Then from how often they turn up in each sample, the known individuals, you are able to estimate what proportion you have caught in your sampling. So that allows you to say, if I got 50 animals, but also the capture-recapture says I got only 25% of the animals, which means there are 200 animals there. That's the power of the method. It accounts for the missing animals.
Excellent. Another thing that I would like to ask you is about the attitude of population of India to conservation, how the people in India see conservation of large animals, because of course this is a very important factor to be considered.
Yeah, one of the unique things about India is there is a deep, there's a very old religion, the Hindu religion, so it accepts that the nature was not created only for man. Man is one of the part of the wider nature. So at a very fundamental psychological level, people accept that other animals have a right to live. But of course they hunt, they kill animals when they have problems. So, but this social attitude allows us to do modern conservation little more easily in other places where people feel it's all theirs, animals have no right to exist. So that's the starting point. But there was a lot of hunting, both for protein, desperately needed for eating, as well as commercial in India, clearance of forest. But when the strong laws came in 74, they came because of the first early educated middle class Indians pleading for conservation. Now, because of the success of conservation, because of the media, because of the curiosity people have for wildlife, the public support for conservation in general and for tigers is very high, particularly in urban areas, and it is now spreading to rural areas also, because rural people are also becoming richer and their need for protein is coming from farmed animals rather than wild animals. So hunting has come down, there is more tolerance. So generally I see it as a very positive change in attitudes, although individuals suffering depredation react very violently.
And I was wondering about the problem of traffic, because besides the internal problems of India, of course, there is an international market for parts of animals, including tigers. And how do you think is the problem with international traffic with the tiger in India now? How intense is this pressure of the traffic?
No, the trafficking emerged as a big threat, but one fundamental difference is the Indian law is very strong. All wildlife is government property, even if it is on your land, and all hunting is illegal. There is no legal hunting in India, so it makes enforcement much more easy. There is no grey area where a poacher can say, I was out there to kill deer, but I killed a tiger. You don't have any room for wiggle room for dodging the law. Secondly, there is a strong enforcement on the ground, and after the threat has come, the government has pumped a lot of money into increasing protection. So those are good things. In the early 90s, when the bone trade and demand increased, there was a bit of a setback, but since then the government has made strong moves, and I don't think the tiger poaching, direct tiger poaching, is as big a threat as it was about 20 years ago or 25 years ago. It has come down. But hunting of prey animals, which is a big pressure, still continues to be widespread over all these empty forests where we should have tigers, but we don't have tigers. If we recover those areas, we now have about 3 to 3,500 tigers in India. We can easily have 10,000 or more if we can do a better job of policing those areas.
Excellent. It's very, very nice to have good news like that sometimes in conservation.
Yeah, and the good news is being repeated in Asia. I think Russia, the situation has improved, and in Thailand, definitely outside of India, good effort is being made in very large forest block called Western Forest Complex. Nepal is doing a better job of protecting its tigers. Even Bangladesh has got chunk where they are doing a good job of protection. So I think slowly and steadily, in some places at least, tigers are either holding the fort or in some places increasing.
And well, just to end, I'd like to ask you, of course, in your talk you stressed a lot the part of science in conservation, and I myself I think that science is fundamental to good conservation. But I'd like you to talk a bit about the relative roles of science and passion for nature in conservation.
I think both are absolutely essential, because you start to conserve because you value something, and that passion comes from that. It may come from an economic reasoning, or it may come from an aesthetic reasoning. This is a beautiful animal, I want to watch it, or it may come from religion or spiritual quest. But I think passion is essential as a kind of a base on which, it's like the ground on which you build the house of conservation. But without the brick, the mortar, the structure, the calculations, the house can't be built, and all that is done by conservation. Although there is some traditional knowledge which can be brought in, but a lot of it has to do with properly exploring, whether it is space exploration, agriculture, medical, or wildlife. Science has to be foundational to conservation. Otherwise we do wrong things and we go off. We may do it the best intention, but you'll end up in the wrong place if you don't have science. Yeah. It is like going in a forest without a compass. You may be thinking you are going north, but you will be going south. So science is the compass that takes us to the goal of conservation.
Okay, I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a big pleasure to talk
thank
with you.
you.
Thanks a lot.